All right, what's up, everybody? This is Brian Burley, Politician Reacts YouTube page, also on Facebook Live first, and then it gets split up into segments. Going to react to The Hill here. They were talking about Caitlyn Jenner potentially running to replace Newsom in the special election later this year. I don't necessarily approve of all the different news sources. There's actually one that's rather left that talks about AOC and how she had a word salad in the last week. So I will make sure to try to have a balanced approach on where I get the news sources. We just did one from Fox Business. We obviously reacted to different ads. So this is The Hill, which is a big YouTube channel. Crystal here is far left. Sagar is, I guess, moderate, if, whatever that means nowadays, or whatever that means in regards to him. So let's react to this.
An Axios story earlier this week reported that Caitlyn Jenner may run for governor of California, and we got a new development this morning. Former Trump campaign advisor Brad Parscale may be providing guidance for her bid.
So, joining us to discuss Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman and co-host 309 podcast, Marshall Kosloff. Marshall, let me start with you. I know you've actually met Caitlyn Jenner before. What do you make of these developments?
What's really funny about this is there's two things. One, this is basically what's going to continue happening in states where the minority party is just incredibly weak. So in California, the Republican Party is pretty much dead as a governing force at the state level. So you still have congressmen such as Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, but you're not going to have an actual strong state party. So that's a perfect chance for celebrities to jump in. The same thing is true in Texas, with a lot of Democrats sort of excited about Matthew McConaughey maybe running for governor, because when a party is that weak, it actually could take a celebrity who's able to break through the traditional polarization that make that more difficult actually possible. You see the example of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But the second thing, and the funniest thing about Caitlyn, is when you meet Caitlyn, you'll be shocked that Caitlyn is an actual Fox News boomer conservative. There is absolutely, this isn't one of those situations where it's a sort of liberal, sort of moderate. No, Caitlyn Jenner is very conservative. The funny story that actually came out of this is when Caitlyn Jenner was traveling the country to promote basic LGBTQ issues with Republican governors. There was a lot of surprise whenever she'd meet with state leadership, because she would show up and then be this actual Fox News conservative. So there was a lot of actual things that went along. I think people were expecting something much more Kardashian-y there. So yeah, there's just a lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot there. The celebrity point is an interesting one, because I would see this too, like when I lived in Kentucky, there was always talk about Ashley Judd running for something, because it was the same thing. It was an uphill slog for Democrats. So what can we possibly do to kind of tilt the playing field a little bit? Let's throw a famous name in there. Somebody people will.
That's one thing that with the recall effort is, if you had somebody who was a big name, there would be less work to get done in terms of name recognition. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger obviously had so much name recognition. I don't know if you could find somebody on the Republican side that would have as much pull. I think Caitlyn Jenner wouldn't have as much pull as some of these people think.
Recognize maybe that will help us out. What do you make of all of these developments, Andrew?
Oh, it just feels like another reality show, Crystal. I mean, this recall effort's going to be a real pain for Gavin Newsom, but I think that's all it's going to be. Just a lot of money and a lot of pain. But in the end, I think they'll be fine, no matter who they put up here. But look, Caitlyn Jenner, as Marshall just said, is a hardline conservative. I mean, Trump conservative. And so this is just not going to fly in California.
Well, I'm not so sure, because, Marshall, she probably is more analogous to Arnold Schwarzenegger's, like, H.W. Bush tax cut politics, but she's so famous. I mean, arguably just as famous as Schwarzenegger was at the time. Now, I'm not saying that.
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, dude was a Terminator, and then they called him a Governator. This is not, if Bruce didn't become Caitlyn, then there'd be no relevance to this. And the assumption that Republicans are going to get on board when a lot of us have reservations about different things regarding what Caitlyn, I can't want to say Bruce, but whatever, what that means, or what she stands for, whatever it is stands for. I'm not trying to offend anybody. It's hard to be politically correct. it's hard to envision that being as popular as Arnold Schwarzenegger. It just doesn't add up on paper, at least.
Necessarily would work, but she does have some GOP backing here. And given just the dissatisfaction generally in California right now with the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, not necessarily, like they're progressive or Republican either, but people are generally upset, at least it looks like, at Gavin Newsom. How might this work if it was going to?
Yeah, the thing that's interesting about the comparison to Schwarzenegger is that Schwarzenegger was incredibly political even before he actually made his run. So
That's right.
He gave a speech at the Republican National Convention. He was clearly known within the broad public sphere as like a center-right conservative type person. So it's not quite clear that one can literally come from nowhere and just run for office given that outsider status. Same thing's true with Trump. Trump spent 30 years saying that he may or may not run for president, publishing books, really speaking to things. And the thing that probably makes me suspect that Andrew's correct about at least the Caitlyn Jenner version of this is I'm just not quite sure that Caitlyn has a specific answer to the critiques of California that the type of voters she'd have to bring in would be attracted to. So it's not as if she's an Andrew Yang type who has an unconventional approach to anything. It's not as if she has a unique policy issue or unique...
They look at things too structured in that way. I mean, they mentioned Trump as an outsider, but obviously I think, you got Major Williams who's trying to say he's an outsider, and he has such a small window to potentially get his name out there that it's kind of the same issue Caitlyn Jenner would have, except a little bit less, obviously. Caitlyn Jenner has more structural issues in the fact that is everybody on board with everything she is saying? Got it right that time.
Angle or unique experience that she really leveraged there. It's that she's obviously pretty socially liberal, especially about LGBTQ stuff, but any gubernatorial nominee in California on the Republican side is likely to have relatively those same sort of positions anyway. So it's just not quite clear what the value add is here. And, Brad Parscale, who is famously Trump's digital director, they're going to have to actually do some work. And there's a whole other conversation we could have too, but they're going to always have to do some work to actually come up with something unique that they're offering.
Yeah,
he is an expert at lighting money on fire.
Relieved of his duties, I was going to say, as campaign manager because so much money disappeared. Andrew, there's a few things here that I do think she has going for her. The name recognition thing alone is actually really important. And the reason why is because, remember, we were talking to Reed Wilson about there may be 1,000 people on the ballot.
Right.
And so the biggest problem up to this point of those who were leading the recall effort was coming up with one candidate that people would coalesce behind. And then the other thing, and I'm not like making the case for it, I just want to kind of play devil's advocate on this, but I think the other thing is you actually probably have a good chunk of Californians who are culturally liberal.
Yes.
And
so they did mention something about there was 138 candidates on the ballot in 2003 in that recall. It's a different. There was almost twice as many Republicans in the state then. Maybe not that much. There was at least half as much. There was 36%. We have 24% Republicans now. So they do have a point about getting behind one candidate, which is why I reacted to some of the other ads and interviews. But I don't know if this is the proper approach. Is trying to find any celebrity. It has to be someone everybody can rally behind.
well, like the idea of voting for someone who would be the first openly trans governor in the country, who probably have some, in my view, bad economic views and would be okay with some of the Fox News boomerism on that side of the ledger. What do you think of that case for Caitlyn?
I still think it's weak. I mean, I still think that Caitlyn Jenner has...
I like these dudes. They're like, obviously these guys are far left. They're saying it's weak when a Republican, obviously I'm not all about identity politics, but when a Republican does it, when a Republican plays their game, they don't like it and they think it's weak. But when somebody who's registered a different way does it, they feel differently. I think it's kind of it's hypocritical.
You know, just a real uphill battle. Just given she's not just she's not a center right conservative. She is a far right conservative. I know I completely agree on LGBTQ issues that she's much more liberal, of course. But on other issues, if you look at some of the comments she's made over the years that would come up in a deep dive Oppo research investigation, I think she would have a tough time connecting with voters across that state. And I think she has goodwill among the American people right now. I don't think she should tarnish that, and she should stay on the sidelines. I just think it's a weak case for anyone to be able to go against a Democrat statewide in that state right now, regardless of if folks are upset about what happened with coronavirus over the summer or whatever other policy you're upset about. I just think that the party is too strong there.
Yeah, it's possible. At the very least, we may get a reality show called Call Me Governor.
I don't necessarily agree with
More
that. I
team
mean,
rising right after this.
the recall election is going to have lower turnout than an average general or a primary. So, what would have normally maybe been with independents leaning a certain way, a 45-55 and 55 in favor of Democrats. If you have a really strong Republican, it'd probably be the most they could get is 45 in a gubernatorial race. But when the turnout's lower and when this isn't a partisan recall, that doesn't necessarily apply here. It could easily be depending on the turnout, be a 50-50 proposition to recall Newsom and replace him with somebody else. So that was my reaction to the Hills panel about potentially Caitlyn Jenner running. I don't see it going anywhere, even if she does. I don't think Caitlyn Jenner stands for really anything politically. Most of their political commentary was regards to identity politics, and it's for them. You can see where their political leanings are. It was when it's convenient for them to be, to play their identity and to talk about identity politics. That's when they favor a candidate. It had nothing to do. It had more to do with R and a D than it did have to do with who the candidate was. But like I said, I have huge reservations. Although it'll be interesting, and maybe we'll poll. Do people prefer, at least Republicans, how much do they prefer Caitlyn Jenner over Gavin Newsom? That would be, if they do, at least Republican voters. I would assume, even though there's some reservations on the Republican side, that Caitlyn Jenner would just be doing it just for identity politics to try to force upon certain social standards and norms that are obviously against science. I don't think Republicans are going to be all hunky-dory about that, but at the same time, I think there's a much more dislike for Gavin Newsom and getting him replaced. So this was my reaction to the Hill panel on Caitlyn Jenner potentially running for governor. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and to like and share on Facebook. Thank you.